In those moments, we often hear the line, "There are no atheists in a foxhole." Do you think about God, or did you think about God throughout those periods?
No. I mean, I think at a time like that, you don't have the luxury of thinking about anything. And if you ask most people who've been in combat, they weren't thinking about anything anytime. When it was a life or death situation. God gives us the opportunity to act, and it's up to us to act. I mean, we have the he doesn't have the responsibility. We have the responsibility. I remember I'm getting this wrong properly. Maybe it was Hermann Hesse. He's on his deathbed, and somebody said, "You're now going to ask God forgiveness." He said, "No, God will forgive me. That's his job." On Yom Kippur, God's going to forgive us. We don't have to square things with God, but we have to make sure that we square things with our fellow man against whom we've transgressed. We got to fix that. And it's a very Yiddish way of looking at things. I mean, nothing makes you a better Jew than being in combat, because you're thinking about your fellows. That's what you're thinking about, and that's what God wants.
You mentioned the Yiddish cop and being a Jew in combat. Was being a Jew a factor that you felt over there with your fellow troops? And also, did the Yiddish cop come into play at times where you were able to think in a critically different way because of your upbringing?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So I was with the Vietnamese. My NCOs were both Catholic. Matter of fact, my boss, Major John Nolan, they were all Catholics. My unit was mostly Buddhists or animists, and some Catholics. The senior non-commissioned officers and officers were Catholics. It was kind of a polyglot organization, but it's really kind of interesting about thinking like a Jew. A lot of let me back up a second. I was a first lieutenant, a relatively low-ranking officer, advising a lieutenant colonel who'd been fighting in Vietnam for 20 years and had all this experience and so on. But it's interesting to note that most of the time when I gave him advice, he wasn't going to listen to it. Even though it was good advice, I can give you lots of instances when what I told him made great tactical sense, but he didn't want to do it for a wide variety of reasons. It took more effort. If it didn't work, he'd get fired, and all these political considerations I had no interest in, that he had to think about all the time, or he felt he had to think about all the time. But most of the instances in which I gave him some advice, and he thought it was a great idea and took it, the risks notwithstanding, were all because I was thinking like a Jew. And I explained to him, this is why I think what I think. Because if you do this, this is going to happen. But if you do this, here are the reasons why it's going to work. And even if it doesn't work, why it's a good idea. It was all a Yiddish way of thinking. And the majority of the times he took my advice, it was because I thought like that. And I convinced him to think like that too. So you had a Catholic lieutenant colonel, a Vietnamese thinking like a Jew. That was my great success.
You taught them how to think like a Gemara.
Exactly. It worked a treat.
On the religion topic, were you able to celebrate any aspects of your Judaism, or were you at that stage in life that you were trying to do those kind of things while over there?
Well, I couldn't. No time to celebrate.
No, when I mean like observe Yom Kippur or
couldn't do
wrap
that.
The pair of tefillin on, or
couldn't do that. We're in the field 100% of the time, fighting the enemy 100% of the time. Most American units did not do that. They would go out into the field. They'd come back to base camp. You could celebrate holidays. There were lots of opportunities for downtime. We were in combat very nearly continuously, and I certainly could think about what my responsibilities were, particularly on holidays. But I thought about them in the larger sense, what my obligation was as an American, as a soldier, and as a Jew. I thought about that all the time, not just on holidays.
That's interesting, because one of the things that today, of course, the Aleph Institute work very hard with the chaplains to ensure that every Jewish service member can have that experience of going somewhere to have a Pesach Seder or so on and so forth. But seldom are people in that situation now where they're in constant war situations and having to non-stop be in the field. What was that experience like when you realized you went out there and maybe didn't know how long you were going to be out there for, and then as those months went on, can you talk a little bit about what that did to your psyche, or what your thought process was, or was there nothing, just get the job done? Well,
it was that, but it sort of reinforced my long-held notion that what you believe is in your head and your heart. It's satisfying to participate in the external, I don't mean trappings pejoratively at all, but it's really satisfying to be able to participate when you have the opportunity to participate with other Jews in the kinds of things that have been part of your life ever since you were young. But in the end, when you're in a difficult position, particularly like we were in combat all the time, it was just as satisfying to recognize. It was sort of a revelation that Judaism is in my heart and in my head, and to know that I can rely on that. You have no idea how satisfying it is. And though I missed being part of the rites of being a Jew, I was very satisfied knowing that it was inside me. It's very difficult to describe, but those of us who spent time in combat know that that's absolutely true.
And on that note of going in and being in service, what is your thoughts on the progression of Jewish needs being accommodated, and the way that organizations like Aleph take care of Jews in the military so that you can be religious in the military?
Well, that's one of the great things Aleph and others have managed to accomplish. Look, it was always, like I said, if your heart and your head is in Judaism, then Judaism is always with you. But it's lots easier being a Jew in service now than it ever was before, and it's getting better all the time. And it's all because of organizations like Aleph. I mean, we've decided, yes, we're soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and so on, but we're also Jews. We want to make it easy to be, if you're going to make it easy to be a Jew, then it's all to the good. You can't take Judaism out of a Jew, but you're going to make it a heck of a lot easier for it to be much more comfortable and easy to do. And that's what Aleph's done.
And you obviously came to a symposium last year. What did that do for you inside when you saw that many Jewish service members?
Well, you said it in one. You gave it in one. It was really quite astonishing to see all those Jews from everywhere converging all at the same time in the same place. It was A, mind-boggling, and B, very, very satisfying. I came home and told my wife, Sue, you're not going to believe this. All these Jews from everywhere, and there they were all together. It was terrific, just terrific.
Did you get the chance to speak to some of the young service members?
A few. Well, I knew some of the kids from service academies and so on. Some of them I'd met before, but people from everywhere, and all coming together. Yeah, I got the chance to talk to a few of them. And what did we talk about? I mean, the service members would talk about military things. Being a Jew, just a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to talk about service.
And how about seeing that many rabbis and big beards in uniform?
I didn't know there were so many all in one spot. I've had one rabbi, right? You see a few from time to time. And of course, going back in time, sometimes you had to be your own rabbi. My father's family was from Greece. They from Yanina, in northern Greece. They'd come from Judea 1,600 years ago as Roman slaves. Went to Greece and stayed there. But I mean, that's where they were. And my great grandfather, whom I remember very well, dressed up in a 3-piece suit every day, filling and had a long, big beard, and he made sure that we got a proper Jewish education at a time when it was difficult, if not impossible, to do so. I'm talking about a long time ago. For him, I mean, he wasn't a rabbi, but he was a rabbi because he was my great grandfather, and knew that coming from an environment in which it was difficult to be a Jew into an environment in which it was difficult to be a Jew, but only if you didn't pursue it. It was your fault if you were a proper Jew. He made sure that we were proper Jews. So seeing that many beards all at the same time, same place, it brought me back, 75 years, 80 years.
You said you connected to one Jewish chaplain in your time. How much of a difference did it make to you for your chaplain to be Jewish compared to the usual Christian or so on and so forth?
Well, it was very important. As a matter of fact, I grew up in an environment in the Army when there were very few Jewish chaplains, and they were not necessarily your chaplain. It's interesting to note that if your battalion chaplain was Catholic, for example, he understood completely what your requirements were. Seriously. And when I was in Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion Airborne, 505th Infantry as a lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne Division, our battalion chaplain was a Catholic priest who had jumped into Normandy, as a matter of fact, and spoke pretty good Hebrew. Back at the time, I mean, I don't think the Catholic Church is the same now as it was back then, when particularly where he was from, you had to be able to, you did the liturgy in Latin, not English, and you had to speak a certain amount of Hebrew as well.
To read the Old Testament. Or
correct. And that's not I'm not Catholic, so I don't know. I don't think that's the case anymore. But thankfully, we've got lots of Jewish chaplains now.